Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of today's economic news. I'm John, and today we are diving into a scandal that's not just a Minnesota issue, but a national disgrace. We are tearing apart the Feeding Our Future scheme, a fraud of monumental proportions, lining the pockets of a few while robbing the rest of us. This isn't just a story about deceit. It's a glaring example of how government dysfunction can turn a program meant to nourish our children into a golden goose for the unscrupulous. Stick around, because if you thought you paid taxes to support society, think again. Some of that money is funding luxury homes and fancy cars. Now, before we dive into today's debacle, let's rewind to the tumultuous year of 2020. The early days of the pandemic brought not only health crises, but a complete overhaul of federal policies. In an attempt to cushion the blow on children who suddenly found themselves without access to school meals, the USDA made sweeping changes to the child nutrition program. Flexibility was key. They proposed allowing for broader distribution of aid without the usual oversight. Lo and behold, what was meant to act quickly to stave off hunger instead created a perfect storm for fraud. With oversight virtually non-existent, the feeding frenzy of fund misappropriation began. Remember when they assured us these programs were essential, vital even, for the vulnerable? Fast forward to today, that vulnerability was preyed upon by the very people entrusted to help. Let's lay out the facts. A staggering $250 million of federal funds were siphoned away. That's $250 million just gone. To put that figure in perspective, if every single resident in Minnesota were to band together, each would have to contribute nearly $45 to fill that void. And what did they get for that money? Hundreds of fraudulent meals claimed, equivalent to a phantom 91 million meals that never fed anyone. That's more ghost meals than there are people in Germany. Consider this. Some of these funds went to purchase a Plymouth home priced at $250,000. That's one house bought outright with stolen taxpayer money. How about the $2.7 million lost in a wire transfer for a fancy new office in Minneapolis that only served to bolster fraudulent operations? And while the public tightened purse strings, $32 million went to nutrition sites. That did nothing to help starving children, with $60,000 and $47,000 respectively procured to buy a Mercedes-Benz GLA and a Chevrolet Silverado. It seems luxury took precedence over lunches. Do you think you got any value out of that? Certainly not. Let's not forget Amy Bach, the mastermind behind all this, who, exerting control over a fraudulent empire like a puppeteer with taxpayers' dollars, and Chereso Fort, who quipped that math ain't mathin', hitting the nail on the head in terms of how surreal this all seems. Amy Bach and her cohorts made sure to live opulently, Watson treating himself to globe-trotting in luxury, over $680,000 worth, even as $64,000 in unpaid taxes when ignored. Now the mainstream narrative wants you to believe this was an isolated case of a few bad apples spoiling the bunch, but the reality underscores a systemic rot so pervasive it could infest welfare programs nationwide. This scandal is but a symptom of a broader disease, one marked by a dearth of oversight and rampant incompetence. Imagine running your household budget like this, with imaginary checks and balances leading to financial ruin. Would you tolerate it? Of course not. And yet, this is the bedrock upon which they stand, daring to call it governance. The libertarian perspective here is clear. This theft represents an economic assault on taxpayers, inflating the burden on the average citizen who will ultimately bear the cost through increased living expenses and fewer public services. This scandal epitomizes government incompetence, where those who are supposed to watch serve merely as befuddled spectators. Every resource siphoned away is a liberty lost for citizens seeking genuine assistance. So there you have it, $250 million meant for feeding our future, now luxuriating as cashmere throws in mansions, as leather seats in luxury sedans. If you're as sick and tired of this as I am, let your voice be heard. If you're tired of paying for their mistakes, hit subscribe and make sure you don't miss the truth about where your money's going. This is John, signing off. Stay informed, stay vigilant,